There's a paper that came out a good number of years ago, actually, and the name of the paper is Weigh Pig, Feed Pig, Weigh Pig, and Weigh, Weigh, not Way. And the whole premise of that paper is that a pig never fattens because you weigh it. Because you put something on a scale doesn't mean that it gains weight or loses weight, right? Just in the same way that in student affairs or in academic affairs or in institutional improvement, just because you do an assessment doesn't mean anything improves, right? It's all about the feed. It's all about the action. It's all about closing the loop. Does what you do actually come back and have an impact or not?
Hello, welcome to Student Affairs Now. I'm your host, Dr. Glenn DeGuzman. I thought it would be fun to talk with three student affairs professionals who just love assessment and who've been very successful in what they do. And I am just very fortunate, lucky to have three people who I have known at different parts of my 25-year career in student affairs, who are, in my opinion, subject matter experts in assessment. So today we are going to explore what they think about the role of assessment and what it plays in our field of student affairs, and just gain tips, advice, insight for student affairs professionals who are getting into it, just kind of a lay of the land. So Student Affairs Now, as you all know, is the premier podcast and online learning community for thousands of us who work in, alongside, or adjacent to the field of higher education and student affairs. We release new episodes every week on Wednesdays. Find out details about this episode or browse our archives at studentaffairsnow.com. Again, we want to make sure that we send gratitude to our sponsors. And this episode today is sponsored by Simplicity, a true partner. Simplicity supports all aspects of student life with technology platforms that empower institutions to make data-driven decisions. This episode is also sponsored by Vector Solutions, formerly Everfi for some of you old school folks, the trusted partner for 2,000 plus colleges and universities. Vector Solutions is the standard of care for student safety, well-being, and inclusion. Again, my name is Glenn DeGuzman. I'm the Associate Dean of Students and Director of Residential Life at University of California, Berkeley. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm recording this episode from Livermore, California, which is the ancestral home of the unceded territory of the Paladin tribe of the Ohlone peoples. So let's meet our panelists. I'd like to welcome to the show Dr. Jackie Thomas, go Bears, Dr. Kevin Jin, go Pioneers, and Dr. Jason Simon, go Eagles. And they'll probably do a quick intro of who they are, but welcome to Student Affairs Now podcast. So let's get the audience to know all of you a little bit better. So the question that we always kick off our podcast is, you could introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit more about you. You have all a deep professional track record in assessment. Just give an overview of who you are and how you got into assessment. Let's start with the eldest of the bunch. Jason, how are you?
Wow, now I know I've been in higher ed way too long. I'm great. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today and to share a perspective. And, it's so fantastic to just be able to have the space to be able to talk about big issues affecting the field of student affairs and higher education in general. I feel like, the role of higher education today is more important than ever. And so love the opportunity to be here. I actually have 29 years of experience in higher education. I started out originally as a student activities advisor at good old Wichita State University, home of the Shockers. Nothing inspires fear like an angry little bundle of wheat, for my Shocker fans online. And then through various career paths, found my way to the University of California, Berkeley, where I met yourself and Kevin at the time, working in the Alumni Association in advancement. And advancement was really where I started to recognize the impact of data on decision making. It's very quantifiable as a field. And so when I knew I wanted to pursue my doctorate in higher ed here at the University of North Texas, I reached out to the vice president of student affairs at the University of North Texas and said, hey, I'm coming with a lot of data experience. Could you help find me a grad assistantship in assessment? And that's where I got my start here at the University of North Texas in assessment. And from there, finished my coursework, completed the dissertation, became an affiliate faculty member, and then went on to become director of assessment at the institution. Did that for a number of years, and that's where my career then took the turn away from student affairs. I was plucked into institutional research and effectiveness after an accreditation opportunity. And in my current role now, I'm Associate Vice President for Data Analytics and Institutional Research, and I report directly to our VP of Planning and Chief of Staff to the President. And my team and I help to leverage data to inform decision making. And we certainly do use traditional assessment methodology, but we also increasingly are using predictive analytics, machine learning, and data science.
Thanks, Jason. Welcome to the show. I'm realizing this is going to have a thread. There's a UC Berkeley thread that's going to kind of weave through this introduction. Kevin, a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn, for the opportunity to be here today with you all. So, hello, everyone. Kevin Jim, he, him, his pronouns. I'm currently the Senior Strategic Partner for Institutional Initiatives and Assessment at Cal State East Bay. I got my start off as an undergraduate student at UC Berkeley, where I met Glenn, and then I eventually met Jason at the Alumni Association. And so that started my delve into student affairs. I went to Colorado State University to the Sahi program for my master's in higher education, and then I got my doctorate in higher education at Boston College as well. My introduction to assessment really actually was through Glenn. I'm going to put him on the spot here. And I remember the very first time that we were talking about graduate programs, and I was thinking about core competencies and really some of the skills that you want to gain. One of the things that Glenn pointed me to was the CAS standards. And for any of you all out there who don't know what the CAS standards are, I highly recommend you take a look at it. We're going to probably talk a little bit about CAS standards in our conversation today as well. But that was the first time I actually thought about what is assessment, what are standards, what are ways that we could take a look at our effectiveness. As I worked in student affairs, I worked in student activities, student leadership, residence life, and housing. I eventually moved up into institutional effectiveness and research and doing assessment and accreditation at the institution level. I've coordinated 2 self-study reaffirmations for institutions now, and I currently serve on the WASC subcommittee task force as well here in California. So I'll bring a perspective that's about student affairs, that's about academic affairs and teaching, and a high level about institutional accreditation, and really looking forward to sharing the time here with Jackie and Jason as well.
Thanks, Kevin, and thanks for that shout out. I apparently now owe you a beverage of your choice when you're in town. So I see where you're going early in this podcast. And then Jackie. Hi, Jackie. Welcome to the show.
Hey. So, hi, everyone. Thanks again, Glenn, for the invite. I'm Jackie Thomas. I use she, her pronouns. I'm currently the Assistant Director of Assessment and Academic Success in the Residential Life Department at UC Berkeley. I originally started my college career at UC Berkeley. So I did undergrad at UC Berkeley, stayed in the Bay Area for grad school, got a degree in counseling, and then realized that school counseling was not going to be the way to go during the financial crisis. So I went and got a doctorate in higher education and started working in higher education. And that the doctoral program is exactly where assessment started for me. So I was pretty much committed to doing a quantitative dissertation because of a comment that a recent grad who was volunteering and came back to an orientation for new grad students in the doc program at Cal Lutheran University. And he basically said, if you want to finish your dissertation with the least amount of pain possible, you can front load the work and do your dissertation using quantitative methods. And that was all I needed to hear. I was committed at that point. And I was ready to struggle a little bit with the quant class. I think like a lot of people, the numbers did scare me just a little bit because it had just been so long since I had taken math or done statistics or anything. But I was ready to go through it, and I did not expect to fall in love with that IBM SPSS manual. And I know I probably sound like a big nerd, but that is exactly what happened. For people who don't know what SPSS is, it's a statistical analysis software. And when I was reading it, it just made perfect sense. Everything was explained really well, and just being able to understand and interpret numbers and to be able to understand how to make recommendations off of those numbers made me feel really powerful as a student affairs professional. So I loved it and didn't really want to stop using it. So when I eventually moved into student housing, I've been in student housing for about 8 years now. I was in a position that didn't require a doctorate, that did not require me to do assessment. But I did feel like I had those skills and I didn't want them to get old or dry or stale. So I asked to attend an assessment conference. It's the Assessment Institute that ACPA puts on. And once I got back, I basically took over departmental assessment, and the director of the department I was in at the time was happy to hand it over. I put it together a presentation for how I was approaching assessment at the departmental level and presented to others in the student affairs division at the campus I was at the time. And then I saw a position at UC Berkeley, which is the position I am currently holding now, where I can basically do everything in departmental assessment. I absolutely love this job and the flexibility that it gives me. Outside of this particular position, I am doing my own research, and I presented at two conferences, two assessment conferences for both national and international audiences. And I also am an emerging scholar practitioner reviewer with the Journal of Student Affairs Inquiry, which is the Student Affairs Assessment Journal. So that's me.
I'm so glad you love your job. It must be your supervisor. I hear your supervisor is really cool. No, but it's funny. I can do a quick sort of like, I have a theme here that's running across this group. So have an affiliation to UC Berkeley, and you somehow end up with an assessment perspective, and that includes myself. So, shout out to UC Berkeley. Anyways, let's thank you for the formal introduction. Let's get the audience to get to know you a little bit, informally a little bit, sort of like a lightning round. Let's be quick with this one, but I'd like to know for each of you, who was integral in your journey to get into assessment? Now, it could be a person, maybe there was you referenced a book earlier, Jackie, maybe another book, or was there a conference speaker who just captured you and just said, I'm gonna go down this pathway? Does anyone want to kick it off?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that I worked at Wichita State for a few years, and what a lot of people may not know is that's the last institution that John Shu worked at while he was writing his seminal book, Assessment and Student Affairs. And so for me to be able to get the opportunity to be in the same division as him, he certainly planted a strong foundation for taking that book and applying it in some new ways. And so for me, definitely the ability to be with someone who I considered a thought leader in assessment at the time.
For sure, John Shu, wow.
Yeah, I'll hop in here too. So one of the things, and this is maybe cheating the question, but when I talk to student affairs or when I kind of do an introduction to assessment, I always like to give people resources. I always like to give people a frame of reference or something to look up ahead of time. So the National Institute of Learning Outcomes Assessment, NILOA, release occasional papers every once in a while. And there's a paper that came out a good number of years ago, actually. And the name of the paper is Weigh Pig, Feed Pig, Weigh Pig. And weigh, W-E-I-G-H, not W-A-Y. And the whole premise of that paper is that a pig never fattens because you weigh it. Because you put something on a scale doesn't mean that it gains weight or loses weight, right? Just in the same way that in student affairs or in academic affairs or in institutional improvement, just because you do an assessment doesn't mean anything improves, right? It's all about the feed. It's all about the action. It's all about closing the loop. Does what you do actually come back and have an impact or not? So knowing that the audience sometimes, when we talk about assessment, especially in student affairs, we sometimes think about, well, I don't like numbers. I don't know how to do statistical analyses. I really don't know how to have access to data. But conceptually, I think we all know this, right? Like, student success doesn't improve just because you did a survey or looked at analysis. Student success happens because you can make sense out of things and ask proper questions and close the loop. So I'll just use that as a way that I kind of tease out some of the introductions to assessment. But that for me was one of the papers when I read it, and that's from James Madison University as well. So shout out to anyone at the JMU campus over there. Good job on that paper and it having had huge impact in the ways that I frame assessment.
Wonderful.
So I would say that there were two faculty members at California Lutheran University that were really integral to my development and my just interest in being in assessment. First was Dr. Dennis Sheridan, who I believe now is at Azusa Pacific University, and the other is Therese Eierman, who came in at the end of my academic career there, but I was trying to finish my doctorate at that point when she came in. She was the most knowledgeable quantitative person on the campus or in the program at that time, or in the faculty at that time. And while I saw a lot of my classmates getting the opportunity to hire people to do their stats for them, she figured out that I could do the stats myself and pretty much just told me like, I'm not going to let you do it. I just want to see how far you get. And I was able to do it. I was able to complete all of my stats on my own for my dissertation. So I think that experience was really integral for me.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing all of it. Now let's start diving into some of this this topic of just being data driven, right? So Kevin, I'm going to direct this question for you to start, and then Jack and Jason, please add. We always say that it's essential to make data informed decisions, and it's really the best way to support and determine how to support our students. And I sometimes wonder if that really is the case, because there seems to be a lot of other factors and variables. Maybe you could say this is all data, but that go into decision making, whether it's a budget challenge, or maybe the current campus climate, maybe bandwidth of staff, maybe just how decision makers lead, sort of their philosophy. I'm going to ask you, what have you observed over your career that is true to you, and maybe what makes this not always the case?
Yeah, so it's interesting you mentioned that, Glenn, because is it really the case that we always lead with evidence? No, it's not. But should it be? Absolutely. But why should it be? I think one of the things that when we're in student affairs that we don't realize is that we have to first ask the question, why do assessment to begin with, right? Like, is there anyone that forces us to do assessment? What do we use it for? Why is there such a big why is there such a big priority on finding evidence and measuring effectiveness? Well, if you really want to know, it starts at the Department of Ed, and it goes down to the regional accreditors, and it starts with the standards of institutional effectiveness and how do you ensure that you have a high quality education for the students that you provide. If you look at any of the standards in any of the regional accreditors, there's actually something in there that says your resource allocation should be rooted in some sort of data, right? Like you can't just arbitrarily put money into places, or you shouldn't be. It's not a practice. So I think that's where I start to begin with, is that, individuals who say that if I'm going to have a leadership style that's going to be rooted in some sort of bias, or here's what an agenda that I have and I want to, really invest in those resources but not others, then you're making a mistake. Even if you listen to the Michelle Oss Cooper, who currently works in the Department of Ed right now, the Deputy Undersecretary for Education, she has talked a lot about accountability for funding. The coronavirus relief package, or the billions of dollars that were given to institutions. She's asking, so how did you know that money was effective? How did you allocate it in a way where you know that it actually had an impact on the students that you served? And if you can't actually give a rationale for that, well, that's an issue. And the regional accreditors are now asking, so with the money and the budget that you have, with all of the financial restraints that institutions are having, how do you make these decisions? So it's not even a question of here's a philosophy that I have, but higher education is increasingly coming under scrutiny over how do you allocate your resources, what decisions that you make, and it all goes back into the assessments that you have, using things like the CAS standards, which standardize everything for student affairs. It's laid out for you. It's a best practice. It's something you see in every graduate program. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that later on as well. But gone are the days that you can frivolously spend, and gone are the days that you can hide behind the fact, well, it's just I have a feeling this works. I'm sure Jackie and Jason will talk a lot about, on the analytical space, on the statistical space. What do we know that's factually true, that's grounded in something that will help student success, help advance equity, help us meet meaningful measures in retention, graduation, reducing academic probation? There's a whole number of metrics we could take a look at, but I'll just stop there to see if Jason or Jackie want to chime in as well.
And I'm sure they do. Jackie, why don't you go and add?
Yeah, so I do see that decisions are not always made based on data. And in some cases, it's not necessarily a bad thing. So I think that a good leader has a 3 to 5 year plan or vision for their area. And maybe it's a different amount of years. Maybe it's only 1 or 2, maybe it's 10, right? But a good leader is going to have a plan for a number of years, and they're going to make a lot of decisions based on what aligns with that vision and what doesn't align with that vision. So if you present someone who is in a leadership position with data that would steer actions, decisions, funding, resources in another direction, one, it needs to be real substantive if it's going to be something that derails the vision overall. But I will say that those visions are only as good as the data that they're founded on. So I think that as long as the vision is founded in some substantive data, that it's, whether you take on the advisement of future sets of data is up to the leader and all of the other things that they have to think about when they're making decisions.
No, I think it's as much as it is about data informed decision making. I also think it's about a culture where data is valued, appreciated, and respected. And as someone who has had to develop triangulated studies for executives to make multi-million-dollar policy and program decisions, you know, to me, it's really the question of, is it really the leader not choosing to use the data, or is it the folks who furnish the leader with the data not doing a thorough enough job to be able to present them with something that they can trust? And I think that's where this is oftentimes viewed as a disconnect in the field of student affairs assessment, where, you know, why aren't they using the data that I'm producing? Well, maybe it's just what we're producing isn't really meeting the need now strategically. And so I think, you know, if we think about data and assessment as a continuum, you know, reporting assessment, indirect evidence, it happened in the past, you can't fix it, it's already too late, versus more mature forms of utilizing data and assessment to get real time, to Kevin's point, academic alerting, predicting who's going to be at risk or who's not involved, being able to look at real time ID card swipe data across a division of student affairs and identify within the first 3 weeks which residents have never left their room and are not engaging anywhere on campus except in their classes. I mean, it really requires, I think, a fundamentally, potentially new perspective on assessment and student affairs. And I love Kevin's accreditation, because he and I are cut from the same cloth on that, as someone who also had accreditation responsibility. It's no longer a privilege, it's an expectation. And I think we as a field we're really bound to the need to do a better job on the data side. The last thing I'll say around this topic is I fundamentally don't understand two kinds of practitioners. And apologies if this is you know, a bit off topic, but one is someone who just asks for assessment for the sake of assessment. Hey, can you run some data for me? Without being able to answer the question that I pose back, what are you going to do with it? Mm-hmm. If you don't have the answer of what you're going to do with it, then no, we're not going to engage in the assessment. And then the second group of folks would be those that assume that the students they serve today in their student affairs capacity are exactly the same as the kind of student they served with the same program they took out of the box 5 years ago. This notion of not keeping up with the changing student demographics. And for us as an institution with 42,000 students now, and a newly minted Hispanic serving institution, and also an R1 research institution, the students that we're serving today and the data that we're generating today are fundamentally different than the students and data that we generated even just 3 years ago.
Jason, I'm going to stay with you, and then we'll see if Kevin and Jackie want to add. But and I want to kind of build off some of the things that you're alluding to. Now, I know all of you. I've known you all, so I know that you've all done department assessment. I also know that all of you have been part of division or campus level involvement, institutional effectiveness. So what are some of the observations that you see when working with other student affairs professionals that do these type of assessments? And more specifically, what do you think are some of the challenges or obstacles that campuses have?
I think, well, without a doubt, first of all, it's resources. Typically I think I don't understand why, as data, tools, systems, and applications become more and more advanced and the skill sets needed to be able to interpret and utilize those tools become more advanced, even as the vendors proliferate in the space, why most divisions of student affairs are still satisfied with one FTE and maybe a grad assistant. And so, especially for really large, diverse institutions of higher education with multiple departments, my first observation would be, to ask the vice president, what is your level of financial commitment, and how do we translate and change the view of assessment as a cost center into the view of an investment center where we can start to generate new returns. Obviously, given the economic value of retaining one single student, if you have a student affairs assessment professional that's partnering broadly with colleagues across campus, can demonstrate the true value of student affairs in that equation of helping to engage students to help them stay. How do you put a price on that? I mean, I could put a price on it because we've done that study here at UNT, but certainly I think it's important to note. The other thing that I would say as an observation is that a lot of assessments today require a village. And it's my favorite African proverb, and I wish I knew the exact attribution of it, but I don't, which is that if you want to run fast, run alone. If you want to run far, run as a group. And so to me, I feel like that should take the place as well. So if we're going to launch a national survey of student engagement as a campus-wide assessment, that's got to be across partners from all of the different divisions. There needs to be buy-in for that assessment. If we're going to do, and I'm just throwing out some examples, if we're going to do the EduCause eCar survey on student and their use of technology, we definitely want to make sure that we have a partnership across the entire perspective. Now, can student affairs lead in that space? Oh yeah, on our campus, they definitely do. I've got an amazing director of student affairs assessment, Dr. Sarah Oosby. She's very involved on the student affairs assessment listserv. And so, there's a strong connection point now between the Division of Student Affairs and the work that we do in data and analytics and institutional research. It doesn't hurt that I used to do her job and totally get what she's trying to do. The last thing that I would say about department-wide or institutional-wide assessments is don't be afraid to really ask yourself what's not being measured on campus right now. Our quick knee-jerk response is always to try to invest in a nationally normed survey. Why? Because it gives us comparable benchmarks to other institutions. But what if the unique situation that your campus is facing doesn't have to necessarily require a normed data set? Why not innovate, partner, develop something locally to be able to help your campus? And I think we're going to have a question later on when we start talking about equity and diversity. I'll give you a really good example of that.
That's wonderful. Evan.
Would you mind if I jump in here, Glenn? So I think I kind of playing off what Jason was talking about of, it really kind of takes a village and it takes an institution to make assessment work. As I think about student affairs and I think about my own experiences, and I'm going to own some of this as well when I entered the field and working with student affairs today, some of the observations that I have is that student affairs still really doesn't understand assessment. And there have been dozens of papers. I mean, you go to any peer-reviewed journal out there, you go at JSARP, Journal of Student Affairs, all of them, and they'll talk about how student affairs still is yet to understand assessment. And it's true that when you start thinking about many of you who are listening to this podcast, I wonder how many of you know how to calculate an institution's retention rate? Because I always get that question: what's our retention rate? What's our graduation rate? And then I'll ask, well, what do you want? You want the 4-year or the 6-year? Do you want your freshman or do you want your transfer? Which ones do you want? Do you want this aggregated by Pell eligibility, first generation? Do you want it by, what equity measures are there? What gaps are there? And they'll say, well, no, I just want to know how many students we're retaining. And I'll ask, but what does that mean? So I think we need to fundamentally go back to our graduate programs and to our training and to our mentorship and to the ways that we supervise, the ways that we understand and can admit, maybe I don't understand how these reports are or how these measures are calculated. Do you know what IPEDS is? I always ask, do you ever go to IPEDS and take a look? And they look at me like, what's IPEDS? And it's like, okay, well, let's talk about what IPEDS is. And then we get into the instrumental roles. So Jason, I'm going to go off of what you said. You said NESI, and then this prompted something in my mind. How many of you all who do NESI on your campuses actually know the questions that are asked in NESI? Because it's usually, my experience has been, we do the NESI survey and the Student Affairs Division says, let's do the survey. And then they'll say, well, what did you find? And then it's like, well, what questions were you interested in? What were the themes? Or we'll do the BESI. I'm sure most campuses out there right now do the BESI, the Beginning College Student Survey. And so we have a profile of what the students' mindsets are coming into the institution. Yet how many of you know what questions are there? What about the National Clearinghouse, right? Do we know where students go when they depart the institution? We can answer that question as well. So I think the first thing that you need to think about when it comes to student affairs is even, yes, we're limited by resources, absolutely. But if you have resources and don't have the basic data literacy to understand, how to actually formulate questions and understand what assessment is, and I'll throw another one out there. What's the difference between direct and indirect evidence? I think that's a key one as well. If we were to say out there, I'll give everyone, 5 minutes to brainstorm everything that's direct and everything that's indirect, could we actually have a balanced list or not? So these are the conversations that I like to have with student affairs, and that I really encourage emerging student affairs professionals and directors and mentors and people working in assessment to really ask the questions, because it's going to be important for you to actually have that grasp of the competencies of assessment before you even move into doing it.
And Kevin, I would say also causation and correlation.
Yep.
A lot of times in student affairs assessment, we say, oh, the student that used service X, their retention rate is 87%.
Yeah.
The student that didn't use service X, their retention rate is 80%. Well, how do we know? And so in traditional assessment, that becomes very difficult. When you get into the space of where we're working, where we're building artificial intelligence models, and we're actually literally loading in 8 million student affairs records, and I can actually tell you the impact on our data science area under the curve for interpretation, that's a whole different story of where we're able to say, no, this is the impact on retention. So I agree with you. Data literacy is fundamental, but right now, unfortunately, and we'll probably talk about this later on in the grad prep question, right now we're mostly focused on methodology. We're not focused on what does the methodology mean. And sorry, Jackie, you probably have something to say too on this one.
Yeah, so I wanted to go a little bit deeper into like the effects of the under resourcing of student affairs assessment, or just right. So you have your student, well, you have your student affairs assessment folks, right? And we're out there and we're trying to assess as much as we can and give people the best data we can. And then you have your student affairs professionals who are not assessment folks, but are probably interested in assessment because they know it's important and they want to use it, right? So I think when you start thinking about a divisional level or an institutional level, even under resourcing assessment means that the people who are not student affairs assessment professionals are not necessarily given the time to learn to do assessment well, which is basically what you said. And then they keep advancing in their careers. And then you have senior professionals who don't know how to make data-driven decisions. And then also, when you have your student affairs assessment professionals that are trying to get people excited about assessment, and you're trying to build your culture of assessment, and you're trying to build competencies around assessment, sometimes you just have to go in and ask for data because you're trying to build the data sets that people are going to need to be able to make successful decisions in the future. And they don't understand. And because they don't understand, and we haven't taken the time to really build competencies around assessment, when you ask for that data, you don't always get quality data, or they wait to the last minute to give you the information. And it's not because, they didn't want to do it. Everyone's busy on college campuses, but that affects data. That affects the data that we're able to collect and the decisions we're able to make around decisions, around data in the future as well.
Jackie just caused me to think of something. The other piece of this too is trying to engender I don't think we're ever going to engender a love of assessment in every single student affairs professional. Rather, I think we're going to have to make some use cases around why it's valuable to them in their career. So first of all, I would say every institution needs to have some form of assessment team with representation from across each of the student affairs units. And even if they only meet once a semester or once a month, there should be some group that is brought together to help discuss the issues of assessment. Second, I would ask the question, when was the last time that assessment was an equal stakeholder in the budget process for the Division of Student Affairs? Is the assessment officer at the table when budgets are decided? Is actual assessment data utilized and provided to either leadership or a student service fee committee when the budgets are being allocated? I like to encourage our student services fee on our campus to ask every single person that comes forward with an SSF budget request to see a copy of their usage statistics from the involvement and engagement dashboard that we put out every year from card swipe data. So I feel like there's ways that we can either help be nice and bring people to the water to make them drink, but sometimes you just have to throw folks into the pool and help them swim out.
Yeah. You know, Jason, you brought up a good point. Not everyone's going to nerd out with assessment in our field. And
I don't know why. It's such a good thing to nerd out, but okay.
This group, I think we all did. Minority here, but I want to dive in and go deeper to Kevin, your response to that last question, and you kind of, and I'm gonna have Jackie respond to this to start, because I think about like my depth of understanding in assessment didn't occur during my grad program. It occurred actually when I became a professional, because I started to see the value of how that can help influence and how I can utilize that to leverage and influence others if I need if I wanted to go in a certain direction or a certain pathway or to get a certain decision to be made. When I think of my grad preparation program, shout outs to Colorado State University, go Rams, I know that I took a stats course. I had my practicum where I built program evaluations, maybe built something that looked like a student learning outcomes. If I think back, probably wasn't a really good one. But I guess the question for you, Jackie, is what advice would you give to I'll give you choices here, student affairs professionals, or maybe even faculty in grad prep programs, so we can start to maybe create a professional population who maybe can nerd out and fall in love with assessment, or at least have a solid competency in this, because I think it is something that's really critical in our field. Thoughts?
Yeah, so I'll start with faculty, and I'm sure that Jason and Kevin have a lot of thoughts on the faculty and the grad students, but briefly, faculty and grad students, I think that when you are looking at grad prep programs, it's important for students to see the outcomes of assessment. So yes, there's here's an assessment project, and we're going to run these stats, or we're going to do this qualitative research together as a class, because most of these classes have some type of experience-based project, which is perfect. But to show students what the outcomes are, what decisions were made, what additional funding was made, how retention rates or other student success metrics were affected is really important. I think for grad students, getting familiar with the ACPA and NASPA competencies around assessment and evaluation is really important, just to be familiar with what they are and how you can move from foundational to intermediate to advanced. But for new professionals, this can be difficult. I think that when you're a new professional and you're not necessarily in a seat where you get to make a ton of decisions, what you can do is start where you are. So it's really about being honest about what's in your jurisdiction, and not necessarily like what's in your boss's jurisdiction or what's in the, director of the department's jurisdiction, and so on and so forth, right? What decisions are in your jurisdiction, and what data can you use to drive those decisions? You should talk about that in meetings. Talk about the data that you're using to make your decisions in meetings, group meetings, staff meetings with your supervisor. People appreciate things like that. People respect things when it comes from numbers, especially when everybody has access to the data source too. You can be a really good influence on others to use data to make their decisions. And then I would also say, because new professionals are typically looking to move up and forward in their careers, so keep track of those outcomes of your data-informed decisions. Don't just make a bunch of data-informed decisions and forget about them, right? Keep track of what you do and talk about it in those interviews moving forward. Because at this point, I think most student affairs positions are asking questions about assessment.
Jason, Kevin, what do you think?
Jason, you hop in first.
Great. So thanks, Kev. I would say recognize when we talk about grad prep programs that it's not just masters. And so I think there's a real mismatch right now at the doctoral level curriculum. I'll start there and work backwards. I feel like most of the assessment courses that I've been asked to come in and do a guest lecture or team teach on, it's very much focused on survey methodology, focused on qualitative focus group process, and those are really vitally important. but I'd like to take it to a slightly different level. I'd like to see more, especially graduate faculty programs, teaching about analytic literacy, teaching about data literacy, teaching about how to establish a culture of data-informed decision-making across any area of higher education. You know, it really concerns me when folks who are making decisions around, let's say, a really expensive technology implementation that's supposed to solve all their problems in a box, don't understand or know the right questions to ask the vendors or the developers, or even within their own campus, the folks that put that together, about things like equity, about things like assumptions in the algorithm. Is it a black box? Is it our data? Do we have to lose our data? Like basic questions that I think today's higher education administrator needs to take their level of assessment and data literacy up a little bit. With regard to master's degree students, I really feel like so much of the focus is just spent on teaching them how to do X, Y, or Z, or plug button A into plug-in B and button C, that instead we lose sight of what the real purpose is. And I would love to see more graduate curriculums embed inquiry in all of the coursework, not just the one token student affairs assessment class in the cohort. I would love to see assessment be part of capstone experiences for master's thesis, just in different ways. I just feel like that let's think about our own personal lives and the data that surrounds all of us right now. Do we live all of our lives because of surveys that we respond to, or are we living our lives of all the different forms of data and the Internet of Things and everything that's coming through our spheres of influence on a daily basis? Why do we keep limiting within higher education the definition of assessment? I don't get it.
Thank you. So this is, we alluded to this in the very beginning of this podcast, and I think that diversity, equity, inclusion is becoming very central to our work. And I know that campuses are now really trying to see how they can assess and measure and get a good understanding of their climate. So my question, and I'm going to start with you, Kevin, how has assessment helped campuses and departments evolve over the past 5-15 years to better serve our students?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Glenn. It's a big question. I think it varies, and so my response here is going to vary a little bit as well. I think for the most part, one of the things is we get back into what is the purpose of higher ed, right? There's a democratic purpose to this. So if we're not graduating students and setting them up for success, if they're not learning, and there's no social mobility, we're fundamentally failing here, right? So we always have to keep equity at the forefront of everything we do here. Who's learning? Who's not learning, who has access, who doesn't have access. And when we really start doing assessment, it requires us to disaggregate. That's the key word, right? You hear that disaggregate word all the time, but what does it really mean, right? So when we have conversations about assessment in student affairs or on campus or in academic affairs, we at least on the campuses that we're at now at Cal State East Bay under the direction of Dr. Fanny Young, she has asked us to say, what is the equity angle that we're taking here? Because every sort of assessment needs to have equity embedded into it. So for example, we were taking a look at the students who are not passing the intro 101 course, for lack of a better term for it. And so we were taking a look at that, and wouldn't you know, almost 3/4 of the students who were not passing that course were underrepresented minorities, which the CSU system calls URM, Black, Latinx, and Native American students. That's a huge issue. That's a gigantic issue. So what can we do there? Well, let's take a look at who are these students, right? So we took a look at the students at the BESI, the Being College Student Survey. And what we found is that the students who weren't passing the introductory course, majority of students had AP units they were coming into the school with. The majority of them had a GPA over 3.0. The majority of them were in honor societies. 86% of them intended to graduate from Cal State East Bay. 99% of them expected that their first courses were to have collaborative teamwork together to discuss career plans with their faculty and to also have study sessions outside of the courses. So we start asking the questions, how are we teaching our students? And are we being responsive to the needs of the students culturally and to their mindsets? And so we had to start thinking about who has access to higher ed, who's succeeding, who's not succeeding, and then coming up with meaningful measures that make sense for us. So equity measures need to be meaningful. Whatever measure we come up with, whatever outcome, we have to really define what is student success. And that's another key buzzword. You hear student success all the time. what is student success really? Because it sounds good to say, well, I'm dedicated to student success, but can you actually define what that means? Again, it goes back into, is it identifying students who are going on AP and reducing that? Is it getting students to get engaged on campus? And what is engagement? What are the touch points that constitute engagement? What, is a meaningful engagement? Is it retention? Is it graduation? And when is it graduating? Is it within the 2-year, 4-year, 6-year? Or is it just getting them to the end point? So I'll stop there because I know that Jason has been doing a lot of really progressive work with the data analytics side at UNT. But I'll just throw out there to the audience that you first have to understand and define what is equity and what are you trying to measure here? Because it could be in housing, it could be activities, it could be in community engagement, it could be in the curriculum, it could be anywhere.
Floor is yours,
I
Jason.
think, first of all, you have to not separate yourself from the data that you're working with. You have to recognize if you have any implicit bias. You have to recognize if there's a privilege of perspective or a way that you were raised that influences how you view the work you do on your campus. There's a lot there to unpack. I get it. But what I would say, though, is for us, it's also a matter of really trying to overcome some significant hurdles as a field. If you look at the iPEDS data, the way that it's structured, gender is very black and white. Ethnicity is very locked in. So we're talking about lots of lumping and aggregating. We are wholesale ignoring certain members of our society right now because we don't have a way of capturing their information on a national or even in some cases at some state levels. So I think when we start talking about data and assessment and equity and assessment, we have to start there, that there is going to be a need for individual units to do a little bit on their own locally because the data is just not there nationally. And so for us, we now do every semester, we do a campus pulse survey of campus climate. And it's a relatively short assessment, but we're asking all the right questions. And now we have a longitudinal data set and we partner broadly across all of our divisions. And we disaggregate that data by school and college. We disaggregate it by ethnicity. We disaggregate it by sexual orientation, and we pass it off to our employee resource groups. I mean, there's lots of ways that we're now using data more effectively from an equity lens. And clearly, when you read the headlines around how certain artificial intelligence, machine learning, black box tools are really predicated and built upon some pretty racist / not good things, I think it requires all of us as student affairs practitioners and data professionals to take a step back and really ask the tough questions about what we're thinking about when we're seeing results. Love what Kevin said about disaggregation, because it's amazing once you stop comparing within groups and you start comparing within just that group and looking at trends over time. What I'm trying to say there is, so instead of just comparing whites versus Asian Americans and putting them side by side on a graph and saying, well, why is one lagging behind the other? That's just perpetuating lots of the historic inequities that we're dealing with. Rather, we should be looking at within the trend. How are Asian Americans doing over time? Are they growing? Are they slipping? And then we can start to design conversations and initiatives to address that. To me, I just feel like we need a complete reset. And it's so funny to me how all these questions keep coming back to grad prep in some cases, but there needs to be some real focus and conversation on this at the graduate level. And so for me, you guys throughout your grad school, so I went to the University of Vermont, and there now, this is a really big deal and it's a really big issue. And so I think we need to start there. It needs to really propagate from the very beginning.
Thank you, Jason, for that. I'm starting to look at time, and so I want to kind of start sort of closing out this conversation, as much as I don't really want to, but I do want to hear from each one of you. You've all done so many different types of assessments, and maybe if you take an interview approach and sort of a concise response, what assessment are you most proud of professionally and why? And it could be for a variety of different reasons. So it's an open question. Jackie, do you want to lead us off?
Yeah, so I actually have two things I want to highlight, and I'll do it in my short amount of time I'm supposed to use. But first is a learning goals project that I took on with an amazing grad student from Penn State, and we built learning goals for staff for our RAs as well as for our RDs. And we used job descriptions, CAS standards, the NASPA ACPA competencies. And then when we use all of that as well for the RAs, but we also included student development theory. And everything is grounded in those things. So once we built the assessment, we were able to pinpoint the specific tasks associated with all the major responsibilities in both positions, for both positions to be successful. And we asked them, like, how knowledgeable are you when it comes to this particular task, right? This really important task for your position. And then how confident are you when you carry it out? And then if they indicated that they weren't knowledgeable or weren't confident, then we asked them why. And we are giving that information back to supervisors and making recommendations about, in general, you know, a lot of people are not confident about this thing. Maybe you should do something different in training. So I'm really excited about that particular assessment. And just finished it the second year. So I'm looking at giving data back to supervisors real soon. And then the other thing is more of a project, an assessment project, not so much like a survey or anything that I collected data with, but I've been building presentations for both new and seasoned professionals on how to approach unit assessment or departmental assessment in particular, how to make data informed decisions and things like that. And those are things that I'm pretty proud of those, because I get good feedback and I see people using data afterward.
I definitely benefit from that work right now. So thank you, Jackie. Yep. Kevin.
Yeah, I'll take a quick approach to this. So again, I'll remind everyone that I started off in alumni affairs, working at the Alumni Association. Then in student affairs, I did housing, residence life, student activity, student leadership. So don't think that I'm any statistical guru over here. I don't have really any stats training outside of the graduate courses I took. Yes, I could use SPSS. Yes, I know how to use Tableau. Yes, I know how to use Power BI, but I'm not really that skilled in it in that way. So I just want to be able to tell you all that as we kind of get into this, and what I'm going to explain as my kind of most proud assessment moment, it was helping to coordinate reaffirmation of accreditation for 2 institutions. You know, one of them at Boston College, one of them at Holy Names University. Again, I'm going to tell you, I wasn't trained in this. So I'm going to say this to all of you all sitting out there right now as student affairs professionals. You can do this. It's not about if you can do the regressions in your head. It's not about the statistical chops that you have. It's about the questions that you answer. And it's about the mindset that you have for continuous improvement. And can you actually understand what are the ways that we're trying to increase student success and improve and ensure the quality of higher education and the degree and the services that we offer. So those are 2 things that I'll put out there that I think that I was most proud of, because I realized that under just the tutelage of someone who's willing to teach me, Dr. Bob Newton over at Boston College, he took me under his wing and taught me. And so all of us, I think if you reach out to any one of us on here, we're willing to teach you. And even with my mentees right now, I teach them. And I'm working right now with an academic advisor who said, I've never done assessment before. It's not that you've never done assessment before, it's that you need to reframe the work that you're doing in a way that actually is about continuous improvement and student success. So I'll just put it out there that I think that any of us can do it, and I'm proud that I was able to have people show me along the way, including Glenn and Jason on this call here.
I was going to flip it around. I was going to say, you know, I had a conversation with you many years ago, and you told me about WASC accreditation. I actually got my accreditation because of you telling me about that. So you influenced me, Kevin. Jason, close us out with this question.
Yeah, I would say two or three. One would be, you know, we were noticing that we were losing students, not only at those who were in academic difficulty, but also those who had very high GPAs. So we engaged in a really novel assessment approach of why I stay. And what we did was, beyond just the focus groups who were really informative, but we also ended it by giving them all sheets of paper and magazines. And we said, we want you to clip out of the magazines and assemble collages that typify your experience at the institution. And then we looked for themes within those collages. And that was just a fantastic visual way to present that forward to our executives, because everyone is used to seeing tabular data. But when you suddenly see these really creative montages of the student experience, it really translated in a different way. Then in more of a direct evidence kind of way, really looking at assessing students that were at risk for drop for non-payment of tuition. And so really designing a specific analytic product that had to bring lots of data together and lots of both direct and indirect evidence to be able to identify where we were at risk of losing someone, and what would the impact of just basically extending them a $100 short-term loan be. So very 2 examples, right? One very direct, one very indirect. And then probably the last thing that I would say is, really proud of the fact that 10 years ago, we started a student affairs assessment portrait symposium on our campus. And prior to COVID, we would get anywhere from 300 to 350 people from across campus. And it provided all of our student affairs assessment areas an opportunity to share with what they learned throughout the year on their assessment with members of the community. And we had faculty, we had associate deans, we had assistant deans. That program actually even won the NASPA gold medal for assessment several years back. So really proud of that element. So really fantastic conversation today. Thanks again, Glenn.
I love the response, all your responses to that question. And just a reminder for our listeners, if you go to the Student Affairs Now website, contact information for these folks are there forever.
Happy to talk.
So please feel free to contact them, because I know that they would love to share more about what they're doing. So this is our final question. It's our wrap-up question. This podcast is called Student Affairs Now. So please take about 30 seconds to a minute. Really, if you could summarize what you're pondering, what you're questioning right now, maybe something you're excited about, or maybe something that was said in today's podcast that you want to kind of reflect on. I just want your final thoughts. And we started with Jason, so let's go in reverse. Jackie, you're up first.
Honestly, I think that conversations like this are really exciting for me. Meeting people like Kevin and Jason, who I hadn't met before today, really exciting for me, because it is very common for those of us who are in student affairs assessment to work in a little bit of a silo and to not necessarily always get the opportunity to talk to other people who are doing what we do. And it's great to be a subject matter expert. And I mean, I definitely take that with a level of seriousness, and I make sure I stay up to date on knowing like the latest and greatest happening in student affairs assessment. But it also means that I don't necessarily have someone to always bounce things off of. So I really appreciate organizations like Student Affairs Assessment Leaders and conversations like this. So thanks.
Thanks, Jackie. Kevin.
Yeah, I don't want to be a downer here, but there is something on my mind that does relate to assessment. And I do want to call out the one thing here that we haven't talked about assessing, and that's ourselves, the human capital part of it. And we all know right now, on higher education in general, but student affairs acutely aware of the burnout that's happening and the departures that are occurring there. And so this is a call out for those doing assessment, those who are institutional leaders, those who are vice presidents, those who have a role in helping assess morale and climate. Assess the viability of your staff right now. See what are the workloads, what are response times, who's departing the institution. I would venture to guess if you start taking a look at departures of the institution for people in these frontline critical roles, that you'll be very troubled at who's going to be leaving here. Take a look at resource allocations and also the amount of work that is now being asked of your staff as well. So Glenn, going back full circle to your first question about, so how are resources allocated and how decisions are being made? This is a call out to student affairs assessment individuals and those who are doing institutional assessment and leaders. You need to assess your staff as well. We do assess students, but it's about institutional effectiveness. Remember that. Institutional effectiveness. And we're all part of the institution. So I will leave it at that for a hanger.
Thanks, Kevin. And Jason.
I'm struck by and really excited about the intersectionality between assessment and analytics. I feel like there's a lot of potential there for student affairs practitioners to get more deeply entrenched into modern approaches to data literacy, and data culture, and maybe stop resurrecting just the historic practices of assessment past, but rather really look ahead to the future. I would say, really, if you're even remotely interested in assessment, don't just limit your own boundaries and horizons by just thinking it has to be X, Y, or Z. Really look broadly across the field. I could see a future date and time when master's and doctoral programs have specific tracks for people who want to have experience in assessment, data, analytics, modern predictive analytics as a whole new subfield of our institution, especially as the risks get higher and higher and the price gets higher and higher for the cost of an education. And we don't want to be saddling our students with massive amounts of debt. We have to do a better job. So I think there's a real social, ethical, and moral calling for assessment practitioners to jump into these conversations. And so I really believe that the future is bright, but we just have to shine a spotlight on ourselves and make it that way.
Thanks. And I want to thank all our guests, Dr. Kevin Jen, Dr. Jackie Thomas, and Dr. Jason Simon for joining me on this podcast. But I also thank Nat, who's going to take this recording and basically transcribe and get it prepared for airing. So thank you, Nat, for that. And again, I want to thank our sponsor. Simplicity is the global leader in student services technology platforms with state-of-the-art technology that empowers institutions to make data-driven decisions specific to their goals. A true partner to the institution, Simplicity supports all aspects of student life, including but not limited to career services and development, student conduct and well-being, student success, and accessibility services. To learn more, visit simplicity.com or connect with them on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And I also want to thank Vector Solutions. How will your institution rise to reach today's socially conscious generation? These students report commitments to safety, well-being, and inclusion are as important as academic rigor when selecting a college. It's time to reimagine the work of student affairs as an investment, not an expense. For over 20 years, Vector Solutions, which now includes the Campus Prevention Network, formerly Ever5, for those old school folks. They have been a partner of choice for over 2,000 colleges, universities, and national organizations with 9 efficacy studies behind our courses. You can trust and have full confidence that you are using the standard of care for student safety, well-being, and inclusion. Transform the future of your institution and the community you serve. Learn more at vectorsolutions.com/student affairs now. To our audience and listeners, thanks for joining us. I'm so happy that I got this is kind of a reunion for me, so I'm happy to be hanging out with my people. If you're listening today and you're not already receiving our weekly newsletter, please visit our website at studentaffairsnow.com. Scroll to the bottom of the page to add your email to our MailChimp list. While you're there, check out your archives. I'm just so proud of Student Affairs Now. We have been blowing up. Our download numbers are closing in on 40,000. If not, we're over. So I'm Glenn DeGuzman. Thanks for listening and watching. Wherever you go out and make it a good day. And we'll see you around. Bye, everybody.